She saw the death of a king, and no one listened. They silenced her voice, but not her curse. Delphi, where gods once whispered in golden smoke, pilgrims came from all corners of the world to ask one question, and through one woman, the gods answered. Not a queen, not a priest, but a vessel of fire. But her final prophecy was not a riddle. A crown will burn. The betrayer sits among you, but the king did not hear a warning. He heard rebellion, and he silenced the voice of Apollo. That silence was the beginning of the end.
She was not broken, only buried. But silence is where curses grow. The wind began to whisper her words. Above, the priests forgot how to pray. Child spoke her prophecy in their sleep. The curse had taken root. The king felt it first. In his dreams, he saw fire where there was none. He heard her voice in his mirror, but he told no one because he knew. He had silenced her. Now silence would come for him. The guards began to whisper in their sleep. The wine soured before it reached their lips. Symbols appeared where none had been carved, and none spoke her name, but all remembered it. She had been forgotten, too late. And the gods had not. The palace shook, but there was no storm. The sacred flame turned black. The seers went blind, one by one. Even the statues turned their heads away. And still, the king sat on his throne, until even the silence began to speak. God saw her eyes and forgot how to breathe. The scribes found her name. In scrolls they never wrote. At night, the palace windows screamed. The high priest tore his robes. In the middle of a prayer, one by one, the gods turned their backs. The sacred spring ran dry overnight. A child drew her symbol in ash, and no one taught them how. The seer stopped seeing. The stars wouldn't answer. The king's reflection began to speak without him. His crown burned his head in a dream, but left scars. When he woke, he searched every scroll for how to undo a god's silence. But the answer had already opened its eyes. The wind no longer touched the palace gates. Not even the crows returned. The throne room felt colder than stone. And yet, he still wore the crown. The palace pillars cracked, not from age, but from silence. No voices echoed through the halls, only footsteps that didn't belong. Even the temple's flame bowed to her. And in that silence came the first tear. The oracle spoke no words, but Delphi began to listen. Those who doubted her began to kneel, not out of fear, but reverence. The silence was no longer absence, it was presence. The king heard nothing, but felt everything. He could feel her, in the bones of the walls. The whispers grew louder, but not in words. No one remembered her words, only how they felt. The ground beneath the temple pulsed, like something breathing. And still, she said nothing. The king ordered the gates shut, but Delphi was already open. The mountain rumbled, but it was not the earth. The crown grew heavier each night, and the people began to whisper, not of him, but of her. The old gods watched and did nothing, but something older had already risen. She stepped forward, and the earth did not protest. Not a sound was made, yet all of Delphi heard her. The king stood, but no longer ruled, and for the first time he feared her. He called for the gods, and heard only wind. But the gods had left long before she did. She never needed fire. The truth was enough. And still, she did not speak. The ground cracked, but she did not. The palace trembled, and finally remembered fear. The people no longer bowed. They waited, because what comes next is not a prophecy. It is memory. The skies darkened, not with clouds, but with remembrance. Each step she took returned a memory. The king raised his voice, and the walls rejected him. His name, once sacred, now trembled. She climbed the final stair, and the city held its breath. She did not enter the temple. The temple bowed to her, and Delphi remembered what it had done. Gods had not forsaken Delphi. Delphi had forsaken itself. But her silence was not cruel. It was understanding deeper than flame. The king watched as his crown turned to ash, and still she said nothing. The silence lingered, and time knelt beside it. No throne remained, only the weight of what once sat there. Those who once ruled now watched, and the people listened. She had no army, but none dared step forward, because what she carried could not be held in hands. It was not flame, it was truth. A truth so old, even the gods had forgotten it. But not her. She remembered, and that was enough. Delphi would change, but only if it remembered, and so the silence remained. Not as punishment, but as memory. But stories do not end. They echo. In every whisper, she remains. Not as ruler, not as goddess, but as truth. And Delphi remembered, for the greatest power is not to be heard. It is to be felt. And what she gave them was not prophecy. She gave them memory and mercy. And when she was gone, they listened still. For silence is not empty. It is memory. It is mercy. It is hers.